Hello, welcome back to my National Exam Prep podcast series. I've got 11 podcasts in this series, one for each of the 10 national exam topics. Additionally, I've got full lesson videos for each topic on my YouTube channel, Tom's Next Level Real Estate. In this episode, we're going to cover exam insights and strategies, things you'll want to be aware of before you take the exam. I want to talk to you about the structure of the exam. I'll give you some study tips and how the best ways are to study and prepare for the exam. I've actually got some strategies on how to take the exam later in this podcast. And then we'll finish up with some overall viewpoints about the importance of remaining positive before you go in and take your exam. Let's talk about the structure of the exam. All of the test questions you're going to see are going to be multiple choice questions with 4 choices. There'll be no essay questions, no true-false questions on your exam. They will all be multiple choice with 4 choices. That's important for you to know because it's going to impact how you want to study for the exam. There'll be several different types of multiple choice questions. There'll be vocabulary questions, knowledge-based questions, and actually scenario-type questions where they'll set up a real estate scenario and ask you what's the next step. So when you study your vocabularies very closely, your vocabulary words. You'll want to know the difference between things like an encumbrance and an encroachment. Things are often confused. Know the difference between a client, a consumer, and a third party. They're all distinctly different, so know that information. You'll also want to be aware of who, as a salesperson, here's a question you might see. As a salesperson, who is your principal in the brokerage firm? Remember, in an agency relationship, there is only an agent and a principal. But if you're a salesperson, who is your principal? Well, the answer is your broker, is your one and only principal in the firm. But remember that. You'll want to know what your protected class are. Protected classes for human rights. What are the 10 protected classes? You want to know the distinction between each one of those. Other knowledge-based questions might be, who signs the deed to transfer real property at a closing? Who's going to sign the deed? They're not going to say buyer or seller. They're going to use terms like grantor or grantee. In our case, it's the grantor who signs the deed. They are the seller. So you want to know very specific knowledge-based questions like that. The scenario questions are ones you want to pay close attention to when you take your exam and read those questions very carefully. Here's a sample of one you're very likely to see. What should a broker do if the earnest money check for a particular purchase that broker has listed? What should a broker do if that earnest money check bounces? What's the first thing the broker should do? Oh, they'll have choices like call the police, cancel the purchase agreement. But here's a good rule of thumb to use. The answer is the first thing that broker should do is contact his client, the seller, and ask the seller what they want to do. Really, at that point, it's the seller's choice. If the seller received an offer and the earnest money check came back from the bank non-sufficient funds, it's up to the seller. The seller would have choices. The seller could say, let's cancel the purchase agreement. The seller could say, let's give them a couple of days to replace it with collected funds. So the sellers have options. So watch out for questions like that and make sure that you understand exactly what they're asking, okay? They might have another scenario question like this. A salesperson is only showing properties to the buyer that pay the salesperson the highest commission. Those are the only properties that salesperson is showing to a buyer. Well, here's the question. Which fiduciary duty is that salesperson violating? So first of all, you need to know your fiduciary duties. And it's not just enough to know the duties, you have to know examples of each one. And what is the answer to that question? That agent or that salesperson is violating the fiduciary duty of loyalty. Remember, one of the fiduciary duties says loyalty, and that means you have to look out for the client's interest even above your interests. So understanding the structure of the exam and the types of questions you're going to see is going to be very important in helping you prepare how to study for the exam. So, what are some study strategies you can use? There's some very basic ones, and then some other ones I'll throw at you that hopefully you can use that will help you personally pass your exam. One of the study strategies I've always liked is, as you're reviewing your material, teach it to somebody else. Somebody in your household, a friend, a family member, it doesn't matter. The more you talk about the material, the more likely you are to understand it, and the more quickly you will understand it. I know people who have taught this information to their pets. Okay, get the cat, get the dog out. Sit down with your material and teach the material as if they were a student. By doing that, you get to think about it a little differently, and it will help you proceed with your study habits. Also, when you're taking time to study, as best you can in today's hectic world, study in an uninterrupted space. Try to limit your distractions. Make sure you set aside some time, and that's probably the best way to phrase this. Schedule some time to study, whether it's 45 minutes or an hour or longer, and really turn off and get rid of other distractions that may come up. Other study strategies you can use while you're reading the material. I've always liked this one. As you're reading through the material, rate your own test questions. A good example of that would be this way. Anytime in your material you see examples of something, like unilateral contracts versus bilateral contracts, they will have examples in your material. So what would that question be? The question likely on the test is going to be, a purchase agreement between a buyer and a seller is an example of what type of contract? Well, it's a bilateral contract. It's a promise for a promise. Versus a unilateral contract, an example you see in your material would likely be a option contract. Well, an option contract is a unilateral contract. So anytime you see examples listed in your study material, you don't have to write these questions out. I'm thinking, in your brain, as you're studying, how would this question be presented? Because that's likely the way you'll wind up seeing it. When you have availability of practice tests, take them as often as you can. I know there are practice tests online. Actually, on my YouTube channel, Tom's Next Level Real Estate, I have several practice exams in video form. Take those exams and others. Anytime you get a chance to take a practice test, take it. And if you get an answer wrong, please drill down and find out why you got it wrong. Don't just say, well, okay, I got that one wrong. Understand why you got it wrong. That will help you if you get a variant of that question on your actual exam. One of my most effective study techniques is make word association lists. Make your own and actually write these down as you're studying. Oh, let's assume you're studying legal descriptions. There are 3 legal descriptions that'll show up on your exam. But as you're studying it, it'll give you keywords for each type of legal description. Oh, in a meets and bounds legal description, you'll see terms like monuments, point of beginning, measures, boundaries. All of those are words associated with the meets and bounds legal description. You get into the legal description of government survey or rectangular survey. Now you have townships, sections of land, baselines, meridians. So the questions on your exam will show up like this. A legal description that contains townships, baselines, meridians is what form of legal description? Well, that one is going to be rectangular survey or government survey. So that's how those questions will show up, and making your own word association lists is going to be a very effective way for you to study. If you've watched any of my lesson videos, you know by now that I'm a big believer in taking notes while you study. Not just looking at the material or watching a video on the material. Have paper and pencil handy and write things down. When you write something down, it's a proven fact that you're more likely to recall it when you get into a testing situation. So there's an actual connection in your brain that's made when you put pen to paper and you make notes, even as you're studying out of your book or watching a video when you study. Write things down. Even if you throw the paper away when you're done, you're more likely to recall it. So take lots of notes. I also want to talk to you in this podcast about strategies you can use when you take the exam. Now it's exam day. What are you going to do? What happens if you get into the exam room, you sit down in front of the computer that you're going to be taking your exam on, and you pull up the first exam and you pull up the first question and your brain goes blank? Believe me, it can happen. So don't panic. Take a breath. Just relax a minute. It's not uncommon for people just to study so hard you have sort of mental overload and you get in front of the computer and you don't remember anything. It all looks like gibberish. So what happened? What should you do? Don't close the computer up and walk away and schedule a new test time. Take a breath and open the first question and look at it. And if you don't understand it or get it, go to the next question. Click through different questions until you settle down a little bit, and then you find questions you know the answer to and answer those. It's important for you to know that you can always go back and answer questions you may have left unanswered when you first went through the exam. So click through a few questions. Take a look. Things will start to come into focus. You'll start to remember the material, and then you'll sort of get in the swing of things and you'll start to answer those questions. So by all means, you can always go back and answer questions you left blank, but don't stop taking the exam. As you get into the questions, you should know this. Please read each question very carefully. It's easy to miss a word here or there, which will change the entire meaning of the question or an answer. So read everything carefully. RQC, right? Read the question carefully. Read it 2 or 3 times. And then read the answers once or twice or maybe 3 times to make sure you understand them. I'm sure this has all happened to some of you taking a practice test. On a practice test, you'll read a question, you look at the answers, and you think, I got that. I know this one. I know what the answer is. And you select your answer. And then you go to check your answer, and you got it wrong. Now you can't figure out, how did I get that one wrong? And then you look at the question carefully and realize, oh, I misread the question. I misread 1 or 2 words, or I left out a word when I read it. Somehow you didn't read the question carefully enough and you got the wrong answer. And that's fine for it to happen on a practice test, but don't let that happen on the real exam. You'll have plenty of time to take your exam. Most exams, when you're in there taking them on the computer, they will have a little timer up in the corner somewhere near the top of the screen, and they'll let you know how much time you have left. I don't know if I've ever, in my 20 plus years of teaching, talked to anybody who said they didn't have time to answer some questions. There's ample time given, so don't rush your way through the question, okay? Read each question carefully, focusing on each word. Watch out for your accept questions. The except question will be all of the following answers apply except. Well, if you miss the word except at the end of the question, it just changes everything. So be careful as you read through the questions. Do that. And know this too. Once you've finished your exam, you'll have a chance to go back and review all of your questions and all of your answers and change any if you want to. Here's a tip for you. Don't do that. Don't change many. Okay, I shouldn't say you should never change an answer. If you figure out during the course of the exam that you did answer a question wrong, go back and change the answer to the correct answer. However, if it's just a feeling you have, in most cases, 90% of the time, it's also proven your first response is your best response and the most accurate response. So you'll have a chance to change answers, but I don't recommend you do it unless you have a firm, specific reason for doing that. And here's one reason you might want to change an answer. This is another insight you'll want to know about the exam. You will find the answers to some of the exam questions built into a future question. In other words, a future question will be phrased in such a way, and there'll be a long enough question, it will give you the answer to a previous question. And that might trigger a memory about how you answered it and make you want to go back and review it. So always remember that. You'll find the answers to some questions in the body of a future question. And I want to finish up this podcast by sharing with you what I firmly believe is your best asset in passing your licensing exam. And that is to simply get a positive attitude. Get a positive attitude about your approach to this exam. I have talked to too many students over the years. I've taught live classes and I've taught classes online. And I have talked to many students over the years who have said things like, Tom, I'm going to go take this exam, but I know I'm going to fail. There's just too much information. I'm sure I'll fail, so I'm going to go take it, but after I fail, I'll have to take it probably 2 or 3 times before I actually pass the exam. And I want to tell them, and I did tell them, that's a terrible attitude. Stop thinking that way. If you don't have a positive attitude about your passing the exam, you're very likely not to pass it. So start by developing a positive attitude. Tell yourself you've studied hard, which you have. Most people who take these exams pass on their first try. And so if you've studied hard like most people have, there's no reason you shouldn't pass on your first try. So rather than tell yourself you're going to fail, my counsel is to tell you, start telling yourself, I'm going to pass this test. I know I'm going to pass the test. Now that's not a guarantee that you're going to pass it, but my goodness, it puts you in a better frame of mind. It puts you in a better position to pass it than if you keep telling yourself you're going to fail on the exam. So keep saying that over and over again. I always like to just share a story of a friend of mine that I used to golf with a lot. And he always hated one particular hole on the golf course because he said every time he tees off on that hole, he hits the ball to the right into the woods. And I remember him saying for years, Tom, I hate this hole. See the woods on the right? That's where I'm going to hit my ball. I hit my ball there every time. So I don't like this golf hole. Well, he'd get up and tee off, and where do you suppose the ball went? Right into the woods on the right. Of course, he programmed himself to do that. So having a positive attitude is much better than having a negative attitude. Again, it's no guarantee, but keep telling yourself that you can pass these exams and that you will pass these exams. One of my favorite quotes for exam taking and for life is from Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. So your belief system plays a huge role. Thank you again for listening to today's episode, and I wish you nothing but success. Go out there and pass those exams. And when you have a chance, check out my career prep playlist and my skills prep playlist. on my YouTube channel at Tom's Next Level Real Estate. My career prep playlist has information like how to select a broker. What's the best way for me to select a broker? What do I look for in a new broker? And in my skills prep playlist, I talk about the skills you'll need to develop to be successful in real estate. So when you get a chance, check those out. I wish you nothing but success on your exams and in your career.